Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Legendarium podcast, another weekend edition coming to you a little bit late because we had to make a little bit of time. We had to allow time for our guests today to arrive. First of all, Kyle, you're not even a guest. I barely even want to acknowledge you, but you're here.
I'm not a guest. I'm not welcome. I just am around.
You're just, he wandered in.
Yeah, it's fine.
And we said,
I've been living on this couch for a while now. There's electricity out here, no plumbing, but it's fine. I've got a corner.
So, oh gosh, get out of my studio. We don't even joke about that. What was it? Kyle, we have company.
Ah, damn it.
Every time we have company, you're on your worst behavior.
I know. It's just who I am.
With us today are Drew and Lauren McCaffrey. Say hi, guys.
Hey.
How's it going?
So Drew and Lauren are, would we say minor or major JordanCon celebrities? I'm going to go with major.
He's major.
Yeah, you're major
Minor.
at least, Drew. So JordanCon, if you're not familiar with JordanCon, it is the annual celebration of the works of Robert Jordan, meaning the Wheel of Time, essentially, and beyond. You know, we also celebrate Brandon Sanderson and Tolkien and other sci-fi and fantasy stuff, but, you know, it's mostly a Wheel of Time thing, and that's your guys' big thing, is JordanCon every year, right, for the last 4 years or so. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I met you back in April, and finally we are in the same town together, so we had to do an episode. So I'm glad you guys are here.
Yeah,
and
thanks for having us.
So excited.
You're very welcome. And if you want to catch Drew on some other stuff, go check out Inking Out Loud. Inking Out Loud is a podcast that's somewhat similar to our own in that it's a book discussion podcast. So if you enjoy what we do and you want to get more of that in your ear holes, we don't provide enough 2 times a week, then go check that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I said ear holes. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
Best behavior, Craig.
So
I forgive you.
So, I was thinking about what kind of topics should we discuss this weekend. We've got these people in here for anything. We could talk about anything. How about the Wheel of Time? You guys tired of talking about that yet?
Shocking.
Yeah, I know.
Not tired.
Never.
So the Wheel of Time, what I did was we're going to make this a Wheel of Tangents episode. So we are going to spin the wheel. I solicited our Discord server for suggestions on questions and topics and prompts to get us talking about anything related to the Wheel of Time. And they really came through. We have 16 suggestions, and we are going to address some, but probably not all of those today. So if you have not read the Wheel of Time, please tread carefully. I think it would be safe to say that we'll try not to spoil the biggest things in the series. And so if you're somebody who hasn't read the series, if you want absolutely no spoilers, then please leave now. If you're not too concerned about, little plot points here and there, then you probably are okay to stick around, right?
Yeah.
How do we feel about these rules?
I mean, I guess it'll depend on
Okay,
which
Matt.
topics we end up landing on, how intense the spoilers are going to get. But
This episode is dark and full of spoilers, is what I'm saying.
I'll try to remember to warn if I'm about to drop like a just giant plot point.
Okay,
Right.
all right. But yeah, tread carefully. You have been warned, and now I've done my due diligence. I get lit up every once in a while, like on Twitter and stuff. Somebody will say, "Oh, I listened to this episode, and Megan spoiled whatever. Stephanie spoiled this, or Craig spoiled that." And sorry, we try. Okay, so Wheel of Time. If you have read it, you love it, and you know everything about it until you talk to Drew and Lauren, and then it turns out that they actually know everything about it. So we're going to talk about 16 prompts here, and we've got the Wheel of Tangents, but the problem is the wheel only has 8 slots. So Lauren is going to spin the wheel, and Drew is going to flip a coin, and that will determine whether we times that number that we land on by 1 or 2, and that will determine the number that we talk about. So are you ready, Lauren?
Ready.
And Drew, go ahead and let's get our first number. Drew,
Heads.
that's times 1. And what did we land on?
I'm going to say 7.
7. All right. So topic number 7 comes to us from Armorhide. I think that's its Christian name. If this show does well, would you like to see some of the spin-offs that never got to be like Matt and Tuan going back to the Empire? So, okay, referencing the Wheel of Time show coming up on Amazon. Of course, if you're living under a Wheel of Time rock, then you haven't heard of this. But yeah, so it's coming up next year. There are some potential spin-offs Matt and Tuon is the one that he references, but there's probably some other ones like the Shara. Or is it Shara or Sharans? Shara is the Empire.
Shara is
Correct.
the Empire.
The Sharans. Are
I mean,
people.
the spin-offs that Robert Jordan planned on writing were the Outriggers with Matt and Tuon, and then he was planning another Moiraine and Land book leading up to them arriving in the Two Rivers, and then he was planning a story about Tam and his time with the Eliner companions, the Aiel War, and finding Rand. I think, I mean, my initial opinion would be no. Maybe New Spring if they don't include that stuff in the show to begin with.
That's everything you've mentioned so far can easily be included with flashbacks, flash forwards, flash whatever.
Yeah, I would be really, really wary of a Matt and Tuon show specifically, just because there's no information from Robert Jordan on that. And I don't know how comfortable I am with somebody just wholesale creating a story in the world of the Wheel of Time.
Mm-hmm.
So,
All right.
I mean, but the Tam spinoff, we do have a lot of information from him about him fighting in the war. I could see that going a little better.
Yeah.
But I would hesitate to encourage that over them getting through the series. Like I'm worried about them getting through the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much.
Yeah.
If we got to that point,
Yeah.
it would be cool to see. Yeah.
And that's
Some of
something
the-
that, maybe we'll talk about that with another prompt here, but I don't think that they need to get through the whole thing per se. They just need to get to the end. Okay, so we'll talk about that
So-
maybe later.
My thoughts on that would be, I'm with you, Drew. I would not, specifically out of the three that we've mentioned, I definitely wouldn't want a Matt and Tuon, because I feel like Sanderson, when he took over the series, struggled to get Matt right for the first little while. And I think Matt is the most complicated character, Matt is the most Robert Jordan personality. And so I feel like that character specifically would be really difficult for anybody other than Jordan to handle. I do think having, if it's a big success, I wouldn't mind having some other sort of spin-off that maybe isn't within the main series. So if you're talking about an Aes Sedai story on the side of some cool adventure or expanding the world out, getting to know maybe some drama around the Game of Houses and things like that would be really cool. Or like a Tom Maryland type of thing would be really cool, but I wouldn't
Yeah.
The
want it
Adventures
to
of
be
Tom Maryland.
Yeah, I wouldn't want it to be specifically a Matt story, I think.
yeah,
Alright.
that's fair.
Okay.
There are some options, definitely, with Tom,
Mhm.
his backstory with Owen,
Mm-hmm.
or his story, before he ended up in the palace.
Mm-hmm.
He's
Yeah.
there's some information there.
Yeah, I think it would be really fun. Or like I said, even just doing a similar thing that Sanderson did with Anders. No, not Anders. Not what's
Andral?
Andral. And he kind of created his own character within the story arc, right?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
maybe you take something from the War of Power, or you take something along those lines, and you kind of tease it out a little bit, but you don't. As long as it doesn't do what I think we've seen with things like Solo and Rogue One, where it's trying to tie to the main story arc too heavily, I'd want it to be a little bit disconnected.
Right. Yeah, they tried to do a spin-off with a Game of Thrones, with Arya heading off on her ship or something and going and exploring the new world.
Never happened.
Yeah, that got canceled right quick. Because it turns out that, especially with a show like Wheel of Time, if it's successful and it goes for 5, 6, 7, 10 seasons, by the time you get to the end of it, doesn't matter. I'm serious. It does not matter how good the show is. It's done.
Yeah, people are going to be pretty burned out.
Audiences are done with it. And so if you do end up doing a spinoff, it's going to be like in 10 or 20 years when people want to revisit that classic thing.
And, just thinking about not necessarily the specific books that Robert Jordan was planning on writing, but something that I would be interested in this theoretical situation might be something pitting Arthur Hawkwing and Gwaira Malasan against each other as foils in a War of the Second Dragon kind of series, because we do have a lot of information about that in like the Big White Book.
Mm-hmm.
And I always found that story really interesting, and I think that could be a cool story. Lots of action obviously involved there. Lots of potential for being creative in a new direction with the Wheel of Time, while not being just blatantly attached to the main Wheel of Time sequence.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So let's move on to the next prompt. Are we ready to spin and flip?
Yeah.
Sounds like a gymnastics tournament.
Heads.
Heads.
I'm going to call that 1.
1. Okay, so that's number 2. Oh, this isn't going to work at all. No. So that's number 9. Sorry. Hey, Ryan's here. Welcome, Ryan. Do you want to hop on a mic? We're talking Wheel of Time. Okay, grab the other chair and you can share mics with Kyle. Okay, so number 9, Lammy Lambs asks, best or favorite background plot lines? Background plot lines in the Wheel of Time. I don't know. There's only like one to choose from, really. That was a joke.
Ooh.
That was a joke. I want to hear Kyle first on this one. Favorite background plot line.
Well, first of all, I guess what constitute as a background plot
You get
line?
to decide.
Because there's so many levels to it that there's like even what's in the background is half the time in the foreground, and so it's like, wait, hang on.
When that there's a reason this is 14 books long. It's because
Exactly.
nothing made it quite to the background.
Exactly. I think just things going on in the Black Tower. So we get a little bit more of that in the later books, but I'd love to see more about what's going on with Mazrim Time and what's like in the actual Black Tower when he's in there recruiting and changing the Ashaman and into and turning them. So I'd love to see more screen time for that. Because you know me, I love the villains. So
Yeah. All right. What, Lauren? You look like you got something to say.
I got this.
Okay.
Yeah. Varen.
Oh.
Oh, man.
Okay. Spoilers ahead.
Yeah, spoilers ahead. So, Varen, her entire situation where she found herself accidentally in the Black Aja and then is compiling all of this research and all of the things that she's had to do, you know, to leading up to her revealing everything and committing suicide. That.
Oh, okay. All right. I actually like this one a lot. And this would be... No, I'm going to save that for another prompt. I hope we get one that will allow me to talk about that more, but I love your answer. Okay. Anybody else want to pipe in? Ryan, do you have a favorite background plot?
Well, clearly I want to talk about the economics and the value of Val and Lucas Circus is the,
Yes.
the subplot that we all really want the spin-off of.
The problem is that was so foreground it hurt.
No, the Black Aja as a whole.
You know what I want to know? I want to from the show. The show needs to tell me more about how Elaine looks in a leotard. That's what we all need more of from this show.
There wasn't
She
enough
didn't-
description
There
there.
wasn't
She didn't
enough,
wear
exactly.
a leotard.
Who wore leotard?
She wore sparkly tight pants.
Is that there wasn't a leotard involved?
Not that I recall.
Okay.
That's just his fan art that he's done on his own.
Headcanon, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, sorry, Ryan. Go on. What were you going to say?
Just kind of bouncing off Kyle's there. Spending more time. We talked even in the podcast about going into more with the Forsaken. The plannings and their workings in the background. I think would be a lot of fun to spend time to see what they've done. You know, even maybe visiting them prior to Rand's ascendancy. Like, what were they doing between the original Fall of the Dragon and that? I just put my hand on Kyle's knee. It was a really nice moment.
Very, very touching.
Okay, all right.
there was touching.
Yeah.
What do you think, Drew? Do you have an answer for this one?
I do have an answer. For whatever reason, I always loved seeing the Terran noblemen whom Matt was like playing cards with and stuff at the beginning of the Shadow Rising. These super immature, awful people grow and turn into these great leaders and battle commanders with the Band of the Red Hand by the end. I especially loved Nelisian. Spoilers, R.I.P. But I loved seeing like Esteen and Adorian, like these guys who were like fat slobs and just total degenerates in the Shadow Rising turn into upright military men and kind of
They shoulder a lot of responsibility
Yeah.
by the end, right?
Yeah, I always loved those little glimpses of them we got to see as the series went on, like growing into actual men instead of these awful creatures.
I was just gonna say it's interesting in the series, and I'm not the first person to make this observation, but you've got Rand and Perrin and Matt, all of whom are leaders, right? Taviran leaders. And I'm leaving the women aside for a moment. But you've got these three, and they're kind of juxtaposed against each other in an interesting way, where Matt is on the surface the most childish, immature one, but he is easily the most successful at taking those around him and turning them into mature, responsible adults.
Yep.
And getting them to do the right thing at the right time and all that stuff. So there's something to Matt there. Okay, so let's do another spin and flip, and this time, so I'm going to probably limit our answers so we can get through as many of them as possible. So we'll just take the first hands to be raised. So what are we on? Number 5?
And heads.
Heads. So that's number 5. Kiptan asks, characterizations you're most excited for. So I assume he's talking about the show. I don't know what he means by characterizations, but we get to interpret that as we will. So what characterizations are you most excited for? And Lauren, why is it Min as a man?
Oh, gosh.
Did I touch a nerve?
Oh,
I do not want them to ruin that dynamic by making her a man. I hope they don't make her a man. But I am excited for Moraine, I think, the most.
Okay.
Just
to
because
see what they can do with her.
I want to see her. I want to see her on screen, and I want to see her be that confident Moraine who's going against things that she hasn't planned for.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to save these boys, specifically the boys in the beginning, right? I'm excited for her.
Longtime listeners of the show will know that Moraine and I have a not so secret love affair going on. She's my lady. So I'm with you there. Okay, anybody else?
I'm just really looking forward to Lan walking up and saying, "You are wanted."
You are one.
They have to make that happen.
All right,
That's
let's spin again.
oh,
Let's spin again. All right, Drew. Look for it. All right, that's number 5. So I'm just gonna call it there. That's actually number 13. All right, Stilgar12 asks, why do we like Lost Kingdoms, like Malkir and Manetheren, so much? Might be just me. So what is it about the mystique, I guess, of these, or is that it?
I think that's exactly it. I think it's the sense of wonder and the sense of mystery. I mean, that's why we love these fantasy books so much. It's the unfamiliar and the exciting, and when we get these big, rich worlds in stuff like Lord of the Rings or The Wheel of Time or the Cosmere or anything like that, we, by necessity, hopefully, are not going to get all the details, and it's that striking that balance of rich world building and keeping some things mysterious and wondrous that, I mean, at least to me, and I think to a lot of fantasy readers, is what drives our interest in a lot of things. And Manetheren and hearing the story that Moiraine tells at the beginning of Eye of the World, that is one of those key moments that draws readers into the Wheel of Time, because you're like, wow.
Yeah. There's a point here to be made, I think, about nostalgia. And you can see this in the real world a lot, where we hearken back to an imagined, idealized past. And so maybe for some people it's the 1950s with its jolly conformity, or you think back to, I love the kind of yeoman era of 18th century, East Coast America, the Virginia colonies and all that. I don't know what, whatever it is you're looking back to. And we kind of think about, oh man, wasn't that great? I read about that in a history book and it sounds great. And then you see depictions of it, or you read an actual historical account of what it was like to live in Jamestown when it was a colony. And you're like, oh my gosh, that's a nightmare. Yeah. I would never want to do that. Right. And so when it comes to even a book like this, when we read fantasy, medieval fantasy like this, we feel like, Robert Jordan is presenting us with this idealized medieval fantasy world. And then you scratch the surface just a little bit, and it's like, oh no, this is a horrific place for so many of these people to live. And look at all these awful things that are happening to all these people. But even within that world, you have that idealized idea of Malkir this perfect warrior society that that does this or that thing just right, and can't we just get back to that ideal? And it probably never quite existed, but it's that same feeling of like an idealized other.
Yeah, I feel like it's both the ideal and the story of it, right? So it's the drama that's surrounding the lost city, because the cities are lost for some crazy dramatic reason. Either they were overrun in some sort of war or battle or whatever, or we didn't even talk about the most interesting lost city in the Wheel of Time, in my opinion, which is Shadar Logoth. And the fall of Shadar Logoth was because of the corruption, and so it's the story and the drama behind why it's lost. It's never like the economy tanked and everybody just moved away. That's not an interesting lost city story. It's always something evil happened and took over this ideal city, or there's the corruption of Shadar Logoth and it's now this like really ominous place. And so I think we're drawn to it for the story and intrigue, because I think there is a certain aspect to the idealism there, but in the case of Shadar Logoth, it's kind of the opposite of that.
Yeah, all right, I'm into that. Let's spin again, unless Ryan, did you have something you were burning to say?
The only thing I wanted to add is just that lost cities, these cultures, other things, also give a weight and a depth to the books that says this society has been on
here for a while,
for a long time. Which if you don't have that, then all of a sudden you lose just a little bit of that. It's kind of what you were talking about, that weight. And I appreciate authors who will take the time to extend the timeline of their worlds to do that, rather than be like, all right, this is the Adam and Eve story of this world, type thing, where these are the first people who are doing magic. These are the first whatever.
Right. Okay, yeah, I think that's a good point. Okay, let's spin again. Here we go. Number 8.
Tails.
So, number 16. Influence. This is the one. The influence of the Wheel of Time on the genre, especially compared to Lord of the Rings and what it did. So this is something that we had originally talked about doing an entire episode on, but I think we can probably just shorten it up. Cliff's notes this thing.
I'll try.
So here's what made me think of this subject, because you guys are Wheel of Time experts, and I really wanted to get your take on this. It strikes me that when Lord of the Rings came out in the 50s, it introduced this new idea of what a fantasy story is. And it was big, and it was epic, and it was heartbreaking, and it was stark in its depictions of good and evil, and all these things that we came to expect. And also importantly, it was accidentally a trilogy, right? Mm-hmm. So if you don't know the story, very quickly, there was a paper shortage in England. He wanted it to be all one volume. The publisher said, no, we literally cannot do that. So if you want this published, we have to split it up. So he gave in, and we got 3 volumes. Suddenly, the fantasy trilogy, as we know it, was born on accident. And it spawned this whole idea of the fantasy trilogy throughout the genre for decades. And then along comes the Wheel of Time in the 90s. And there were, I'm not saying that all fantasy was trilogies. There were, the Belgariad was 5 books. There are examples of other things that were not quite that, but that was the norm. And then the Wheel of Time comes along, and he's like, just like every other fantasy author, he's like, I'm going to write me a trilogy. And then it accidentally becomes 14 massive books. He originally, was going to do 12. And then it became this huge thing. And so it has now rewritten what the epic fantasy genre is. And now we have Sanderson writing this 10-book epic. We've got 5 books for Lightbringer. That's 1.5 million words. We got Malazan. That's, I don't know, what is it? 1,800 books and counting. So
something like that.
Yeah. Anyway, so even in just that way, it has rewritten a little bit of the DNA of the genre, but there's a lot more to dig into, right, Drew?
Yeah, and I think probably the most enduring influence outside of just the proliferation of these massive multi-volume epic fantasies in the wake of the Wheel of Time, when almost immediately after that success, we see things like the Sword of Truth popping up, and A Song of Ice and Fire, and Malazan, and so on and so forth. I think the trend in fantasy and in the kinds of stories that authors were trying to tell after the Wheel of Time was both in recognition and in opposition to the Wheel of Time. And that was, the Wheel of Time took the Tolkien esque fantasy and brought that style of story to its apex. And we're not seeing people trying to surpass that anymore. We're seeing people writing in opposition to that. We're seeing subversive fantasies. We're seeing grimdark explode. You know, we're seeing, especially in probably the last decade, a proliferation of authors of color, and instead of Eurocentric fantasies, we're seeing fantasies based on African cultures and Eastern Asian cultures, and you know, it's trying to write the unfamiliar now, because the familiar that Tolkien established back in the mid 20th century has reached its natural conclusion in a way, and it's almost time for us to write something different.
Interesting. Okay, Ryan, what do you think of this?
I hadn't really actually thought of it along those lines, but I think I agree with that quite completely. I would love to be a little more aware of the how audience response to things has changed those things, because we talk about grimdark becoming a very comforting, and it's the Song of Ice and Fire and things like that audiences are clamoring for, that they're actually waiting for, they're doing the pre-orders, that are telling people this is what I want more of. And at the time with Wheel of Time, I wasn't a follower of the Wheel of Time when it was coming out there, but I did have friends who were, and I know that they were always clamoring for the next book to come out. And so I'm curious as to what the current demand is. What is it that the audiences are saying that's going to shape what fantasy is going to be? What is our next Wheel of Time going to be based on what our people are asking for?
Right. And I would hope, and I think this is the case, but I would hope that it's the case that it won't be what fans are clamoring for that will change the genre. It'll be another bolt from the blue. It'll be something that nobody was expecting that comes out, and look, this is not a knock on anything that's being published now, to say that we haven't had anything really revolutionary in a while, right? There's a lot of great fantasy out there, but nothing that has quite taken the genre by storm in the way that some of these other things have, especially Wheel of Time and Lord of the Rings. And so anyway, that's my only 2 cents in response to that.
I feel like as well, you've got to Drew's point, like there was this culmination of, or the apex of this type of storytelling, and it kind of spread out. I feel like we're getting there. I feel like with what Sanderson's doing in the Cosmere and how massive that story is on top, and I haven't even read the Cosmere, and I'm familiar with how massive that is. I feel like we're going to get to a fatigue point where there's so much.
Get to?
Yeah, right. I mean, we're there already, right?
Maybe
we are. I mean, I'm definitely struggling with it. It's such a huge mountain to climb. And it's kind of one of those badge of honors. Like if you get through this, you've gotten through it. That used to be the Wheel of Time, that you've read all 14 books. Now it's the Cosmere because there's so much. And I'm wondering if we're at another turning point where it's going to be, we have things at our disposal now as fantasy sci-fi fans that, we have Netflix and things like that where we can binge watch stories. We can take bite-sized stories in games, or like I said, on streaming services, or so I feel like the magnitude of stories that are being told, I wonder if the next evolution of fantasy is going to be more on a micro scale.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting how you brought up the Cosmere, and oh man, this is such an onion to peel back layers on. So where the Cosmere
we might
is
spin
this
the wheel again, ladies and gentlemen. We might.
Monolith. But Brandon Sanderson foresaw that, and that's why he tried to write it in these bite-sized chunks. Like, here's a standalone, and here's a trilogy, and here's another standalone. And then, and this is, I'll freely admit something I'm guilty of, the fandom took that and is forcing it as a monolithic whole upon new readers, instead of saying, hey, maybe try out the Mistborn trilogy, and if you like that, read on. It's like, here's
the Cosmere.
Yeah.
Thank you for making that point. Thank you, Drew.
and yeah, like I'm calling myself out on that. So, because it's like, I'll freely admit, there's a screenshot of a full Cosmere reading order from my phone that titled Drew's Cosmere reading order floating around the Facebook groups. Like,
well, I don't think there's anything wrong with within the fandom talking about that. But sorry, now we're getting a little bit too far afield.
But to that point that Kyle said, I think you're right in that authors are recognizing the fatigue and are trying to write more accessible things in the size.
And the authors themselves are fatigued because they can't finish their damn series anymore, right? How many series are we waiting on to be finished?
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
I got two off the top of my head.
I think we all have.
Yeah.
So let's spin again.
Wait, I got
sorry,
one.
Lauren. Yeah, you want to go?
Okay.
I want you to go
So
too.
I felt like one thing Robert Jordan brought that I haven't seen a whole lot of was the amount of exploration into different cultures.
Mm-hmm.
Like each of his regions, you've got clothing, you've got speech patterns, you've got traditions and ways of thinking that you don't normally see that. In fantasy, it's a lot to pack into one book. When you've got characters who are exploring an entire city and culture, it's mostly just, we've got our mission, we're going to buzz through, but he brought that in. And it seemed to be one of his focuses.
Yeah, that was
I think
definitely...
he really, I feel like Sanderson took, because he's in the Stormlight archive. You see those different cultures, and you see the different people of that world.
That's certainly the case with things like Malazan. And,
Right, right.
Yeah, we were talking about this maybe with Ryan. Easy, breathe.
Oh goodness.
I'm in the middle of Dead House Gates right now. I've been trying to push through. I've been trying to get miles on. I am just, my head is exploding trying to keep track of what is going on in this.
But I want to go back to something that we actually brought up on our Broken Eye episode last week, which was that this is something that epic fantasy does well, and that non-epic fantasy readers are understandably frustrated by, but those who enjoy it, this is why we enjoy it, because it takes the time to explore things and to breathe and to actually inhabit a culture for a few pages instead of just breezing right through it, like you said, Lauren.
Mm-hmm.
All right, shall we spin?
Yeah.
Let's do it. All right, I can't even remember what we've talked about. Number 5, so we're
Heads.
actually, we've done both number 5s, so let's do that. Okay, number 7. Number 7, which means number 15 in this case. Sorry, because we've already done
Yeah.
Lemmy Lambs asks, how would you rearrange book events, primarily books 8 through 11, to make that section of the show less of a slog? So Lemmy Lambs just annoyed a lot of people by begging the question here. In this case, we are assuming that there is a slog. Some people dispute that. I'm going to go ahead and say, yeah, there's a slog. It's real. You can debate how sloggy it is, but what do we need to change, if anything?
Oh, Drew, here we go.
How you doing, Drew? How's your blood pressure? You all right?
No, my blood pressure is okay. It's just that's a big question. The only thing that immediately leaps out to me is I would break up the cleansing, and I would
Spoiler alert.
cut away and give people glimpses. It doesn't need to be full-on 5-chapter sequences like we got in Crossroads of Twilight, but take some of those moments from Crossroads of Twilight that felt so slow because they were just a rewind of what everybody else is doing while that bloody beacon is out in the distance. Just take that cleansing sequence and cut away at points to show how other people are reacting while it's happening, and then cut back to the action.
Yeah, I agree with that, because I think the show is actually a better medium to tackle
To show
books
Elaine's
9
bath?
and 10. Yeah, that's what he meant by the cleansing, was Elaine's bath.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
But I mean that was the issue, right? You read book 9, and then you've got all these story arcs that have to catch up to what's going on in book 10, and it feels like, wait, this is a weird shift, and so you can cut back and forth a lot easier.
I've got one thing you can do immediately, and I mean immediately. Either don't introduce Fail or let her drown in the damn river
Oh my god.
when she meets parents, and then you don't have to worry about rescuing her later on. So,
We use that when I tell him he's failed at something.
what are you, Fail?
You failed. Just because so many people call her Fail.
I know. I did soften toward Fail by the end of the series, but she's still a fun punchline. So
Oh.
sorry,
She
sorry,
is.
Fighting
Too
fans.
She is.
Okay, so maybe I'm just not even going to spin anymore. We'll do a couple more, but we better start wrapping this up. Our buddy Daniel Green submitted a question. He would like us to debate whether more braids are tugged or skirts smoothed. We need answers.
Skirts.
Oh, is that real? Is that a thing?
I don't know the actual numbers, but it's got to be skirts. There's only
Yeah.
one person tugging on her braid,
but
and
she
there are
tugs it
so
constantly, which
but there
sounds
are
filthy.
so
So
many
many
women smoothing their
skirts.
Make it sound like she's a teenage boy, like who just discovered the incognito mode.
The wheel of time to clear your cookies.
I want to see this actress like master that. Just her, just being like,
Thank you for saying that.
I'm pretty sure that's how she auditioned. They're just like, come in, tug the braid,
Tug the braid.
and go.
You're good.
Okay. let's move on. Let's move on. Okay. I like this one. We're gonna do a twofer here, and this is where we're gonna end it for today. And if I didn't get to yours, I apologize. But oh, you know what? No, we're gonna go quick fire. Yeah, I'm gonna make my way through as many of these
I
as
thought you
we
were
can.
going to say, okay, no, I don't apologize.
That's true. I really oughtn't. Rowan Kenobi, do you think they will keep the in-world swearing?
Yes.
yes,
They've got to.
Please.
That's what makes it so great. Mother's milk in a cup. If they get rid of that, I'm gonna be so pissed.
Sheep swallop and bloody buttered onions.
Let's see. Oh, there it is. Abe Lincoln Froman. What? Which is the greatest name of all time. I'm just
The
going to say it
sausage
every
king
time.
of Chicago.
Actually, we're going to come back to Abe Lincoln Froman in a second. Haliax asks changes that the series should make. Should make. We talked a little bit about addressing the slog in 8 through 11, or I would say 8 through 10.
Lauren's going to hate me for this one, but I
Okay.
mentioned it on our original run of
Yep.
the podcast.
I know what you're going to say.
You got to cut Min out and give her character and spread that out to other characters.
I'm all aboard. I can't stand men.
no, I'm not gonna hate it. I just don't want them to make her a boy.
All right.
All right. Yeah, that was.
You'd
that
rather
was-
she die than be a man.
Yeah, yeah.
this show needs men like fish need a bicycle.
So I have one that I would like to see cut. I would like for them to cut the weird little like Elaine flirting with Tom thing
oh,
at the
okay.
beginning
Yeah,
of
yeah,
Fires
yeah.
of Heaven.
Yeah,
I,
that
like,
gets a little odd.
that was so weird and so out of place.
Combine like 1,200 Aes Sedai into the other 1,200 Aes Sedai. All the random one-offs can be one giant Aes Sedai.
So Cian and Saerin and Ciaran can all become one Aes Sedai instead of three.
Sierran.
You
yes.
guys are all making my head explode. As this is file this one under. It's not because I don't enjoy it in the book, but to streamline the show to get us through all this stuff a little bit quicker. Sorry, Ogier, you're out of here.
Oh no.
I know. I
might have
love
to.
Loyal. I love Ogier. That's not what I'm saying. But in an adaptation, I might say they've got to go. So, in a similar vein, Abe Lincoln Froman, what do you think the show has to include? And if it doesn't, it sucks. Ooh, good question.
Just outside of core plot points.
I'm gonna go with the design because it's a pretty clear design. The design of the Trollocs. If they orc up the Trollocs, then I don't think that will be acceptable. They have to include the Trollocs as written visually.
They have to include the Shanchan. I don't think they're going to cut them, but they have to include them.
Okay. The greatest, I mean, I think the single greatest plot point in all of Wheel of Time might be Egwene Collard.
Oh.
It's
Yeah.
it's the most visceral moment for me in the entire series, and it ripples throughout the entire thing
Yeah.
and informs everything about her character after that. So,
She doesn't make sense. Her actions don't make sense without that.
right.
I feel like they have to spend time with Rand in the box.
Oh, yeah.
Like they need to
no.
do Rand in the box justice, or it will have been a fail.
Oh, that's
Oh,
rough.
that's a
That's gonna
great
be
point.
rough.
Ryan, you look like you're thinking hard. Did you want to throw anything in there?
No, you guys hit it pretty well. I'll keep coming up for like minor things that I hope don't drop off, but nothing major that it has to be there. Like the
Okay.
Fox and Snake stories, the how Matt gets his memories. and
Yeah.
everything. Like moments like that, like I feel like it's important, but they could potentially
They could adapt it
work
away.
around it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what do you say we call it there? We feeling good?
Yeah,
we actually
feeling
addressed,
good.
if we didn't address every single one, it was really close. So thank you, everybody, for submitting questions. I hope you enjoyed it. It's, again, it's a weekend episode, so we just screw around for a little while, and I hope that it makes sense on the mics. So go to patreon.com/legendarium if you appreciate what we do and you want to support the show and you want to see it continue. Then patreon.com/legendarium is where you can go do that. If you would like to join the conversation, go to thelegendarium.reddit.com, or you can hit me up for an invite to the Discord server where we do a lot more live chatting amongst ourselves and with the listeners. So with that in mind, follow us on all the other social medias, and we'll be back next week with another Dresden Files episode. So there's Dresden Files coming up. We got more Lightbringer coming up, and we'll be happy to see you there. Lauren, Drew, thank you so much for coming in.
Yeah, thank you.
We've enjoyed it.
Good. And everybody go check out Inking Out Loud and listen to Drew there as well. All right, we'll see you later.
We were sitting in the car. We were not making out. We were not doing anything like that. We were just talking in the car. And he was like, I feel like you get a lot from somebody else when you make eye contact. He was like, do you want to... Like,
Oh, no.
I feel like that sounds a lot like something a serial killer
I feel like
would
he
say.
was probably.
he's not
I
a
feel
serial
like he was
killer.
gonna say like, "Do you want to make out?" But chickened out, so he was like, "Do you want to make eye contact?"